So first of all, welcome everybody on my own behalf and on the behalf of the Ministry of Culture and Informing of Serbia. So your participation at this event, which usually has a different format, your appearance makes this meeting very specific now. So I believe that we will succeed in spite of these unusual circumstances, and I feel that our meeting will be meaningful and that our conversation will be interesting to the audience who will have the opportunity to see it. So how will we, let's see how we will hand the floor. Mr. Kusturica, would you please like to be next? This is a great topic for this time that we are living in. We are now experiencing the creation of a new negative myth, which, even though it's dangerous, it's also it's used to scare people, and it's just a part of all the troubles that humans have suffered, and it's not as big as a disaster as our ancestors had. So we are living in the age of the myth of the corona. We don't know much about corona, so this is possibly the first time that such an event has encompassed the entire planet, everybody on the planet. So talking about myth and mythology is very meaningful today because we are living in the time of instant myths, and those who have very carefully, the myths have been very carefully or even ideologically designed for the modern man. Thank you. This was an excellent introduction. So now, what about the order of the participants? Can we maybe the guests can propose the order that they would like to speak in?
May I start? You hear me?
Samo izvolite, da.
Yeah, I would like to start with the expression of the word myth. As you know, it's an old Greek expression, and it's a translation for word, talk, or narrative. And in that original sense, communication is the exchange of myths. It's no contradiction to truth. But in a world where, as now we can see, the science is dominated and it's quantitative measurements and not qualitative research which is dominating, we see in the past 3 months especially, it was, for instance, virologists who performed politics, which led to one of the biggest crises, lockdown, in the last century. Not to speak of whom to blame for it. It's not so much the virus, to my experience, but the measurements against it. So under such circumstances, the term myth is somewhat discredited, as Emir Kusturica already told, and used as a contradiction to truth. But as a historian, and I'm an economic historian, I can tell you that it is a false confrontation, myth and truth, because each generation of historians, for instance, is demystifying the narrative of the forerunners, and thereby indirectly acknowledging the truth of the past. So that is, from my side, sort of an introduction.
Dobro, hvala.
Okay, thank you. Do we have someone else?
Evo je, mogu ja?
Can I, please?
Prvo, dobar dan svima.
Good day, everyone.
Čisto kao likovna
As an artistic depiction, so to speak, this virus is very interesting because it carries in itself something that has already become part of mass usage and the spectacle of the moment, so to speak. Although the emergence of this virus is much more serious and grave, when it comes to all individual freedoms, it's much more threatening and dangerous. But interestingly enough, in all these periods, when these big crises are happening, myths are very connected to some life forms. So this is a spontaneous discussion, in my opinion. I'm thinking of a minotaur. Minotaur that has become part not only of the ancient Greek myths, but it's also part of contemporary culture of mankind and in different eras of mankind, from Borges to Picasso, etc. So why is the Minotaur depicted as half bull and half man, and why has it been placed in a labyrinth? The labyrinth on its own, per se, is a quite difficult thing. And the Minotaur that's waiting for his victims in the labyrinth is the same thing that we can interpret sociologically or in any other way. It represents something that is different, dangerous. Although I'm a writer, I'm not a historian, but I know that the Minotaur emerged when this Minoid culture was at its demise. And on one hand, since it became part of the Greek myths, it was depicted as a monster that is losing the battle, although it's in this big labyrinth. Why is it losing the battle? Because very quickly the civilization, ceased to exist. Maybe it was a way to see this new monster. I see that it's represented very often in installation, in arts, and there will probably be blockbusters about the pandemic. We'll have new stars and heroes that will be destroying the virus at the last moment, etc. But interestingly enough, in the aesthetic depictions, because the myths are symbolized not only in stories, but it's symbolized in our imagination as a picture. And let me finish. I think that the emergence of this myth and the visualization in the whole world, which is planetary, so visualization of the myth can make us think as to whether this is a step towards when one type of worldview is on the demise, a civilization, a worldview. Is this emergence of this virus, whether it's biologically justified or not, this is not our discussion, but is this a symbol saying, let us cease this let us cease with this consumerism, this consumption model, neglecting the environment and self-sufficiency. That is why this virus, that is why it has arrived to warn us that we are finite and that our civilization even if we enjoy it and even if we think then it's that it's entertaining or pleasant to live in, it shows that this is only partially true. The virus is a sign that this world is simply not enough. This applies especially to artists, because I think that artists face also this consumerism, this demand for products, arts as products that are consumed. Well, this is more or less what I think. Thank you. I propose us to give the floor to the only lady among us, Thea Albrecht. Good day. Please, you have the floor.
It's interesting. Obviously, we're all considering this pandemic in a mythological sense, particularly because of this conversation and possibly because of what it is we do for a living. I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell, and he used to say, even back in the 80s, that the world needs a new mythology, that because the world's cosmology has so far outpaced its mythology, it needs a new global mythos. I'm also very much paraphrasing here, but I believe that Carl Sagan used to say that he wished that the space aliens would hurry up and get here so we could all gather around the same story for once. And you know, it's no secret that there's been a global obsession with myths of the apocalypse in the last 10, 15 years as we begin to acknowledge more readily climate change and its role in the demise of the civilization that Mr. Prokopiev is talking about. So yes, I think the pandemic is going to end up being fertile ground for stories. It's going to end up being fertile ground for possibly a new mythos. It is, for the first time, a crisis that we are all experiencing together in a way where we are visible to each other, and our personal processing of a crisis is being used in a public way, right? We're all seeing, we're sitting even right now and looking into each other's houses, and this is how our culture has become. So it's interesting. It will be interesting to see the divergence between the politicization of the virus and the stories that emerge from it. A particularly insidious myth, I think, of our time, and I think we owe this to broader storytelling traditions, in the notion that our struggles end, right? I think it's a huge part of the way we like to conclude our stories. A just fight is fought, the enemy is vanquished, and then this new dawn appears, right? And it appears for the last time, because in our stories, these dawns are cyclical. There has always been a past dawn that the darkness of today eliminated, and now we have to return to that dawn or arrive at a new one. And yet, though we know this is how our stories work, we know that all struggle is cyclical, and it doesn't actually end. We just sort of progress slowly and then revert and progress and revert. So I wonder whether this pandemic and the mythology that it will spawn will finally lead us away from the kinds of storytelling where we say this was the last battle, this was the definitive battle. We don't have to fight for this particular set of balances anymore. So that's my thought.
Thank you. So if anybody else would like to say something and be the next speaker, okay, so the floor is yours. I wanted to say that I was carefully listening to the previous speakers, to my colleagues, and I don't want to be more skeptical than what I naturally am. But anyway, I think that this crisis that we're living in right now, which is connected to the coronavirus, of course, this is a very serious crisis which will affect all of us, but it is still not become a myth. It has still not grown enough to become a myth. Just like some of the colleagues already said, so starting from now, the coronavirus can be a good basis for the birth or creation of a new myth. So everybody of us, all of the artists, historians, can contribute to the creation of this new myth, because myth is a mental structure. This is a story which can be as fantastic as possible, but at the end of the day, it speaks about the truth. So it will be up to us to focus and to pay attention, to contribute to the creation of this new myth. And of course, this can lead to one or many myths. So when we talk about this, I think that, and I hope I will be able to explain this well. So this crisis that we have experienced with the coronavirus is a very serious crisis, and we can say that no country was exempt from this. If I remember well, now we have more than 400,000 people dead already. My own country, so Spain, was one of the countries that was most severely struck by the virus. So we have to understand that this is a very serious crisis. But I don't believe that this will create a crisis which will be bigger than the previous crises from the past that humanity has experienced. It's just that now we have the media which maybe speak much more about certain things which are specific and relevant to the coronavirus. And this is this lockdown, this quarantine, that we went through. So this is what produced a strong reaction in the communication media, because in fact, this lockdown has had a horrible effect. So, of course, there are other crises, other diseases that have caused many dead people, for example, AIDS and so on, that we have been living for decades, which resulted in millions of people dead. So, even if we are only counting the human lives, we have to bear in mind that some diseases have had a far worse results, far more deaths. And if we think also about other wars, humanitarian disasters that we had throughout history, so big political and war conflicts, that also resulted in really horrible figures and major changes of paradigms in the culture and in our lives, I still cannot see why this crisis particularly should produce certain, let's say, problems which would be bigger than the ones from the past. To me, right now, in order... what I can say now is that we maybe more clearly see things that used to be present in the Western culture, such as the importance of public services, for example, the importance of public information, the importance of revalorizing or appreciating certain professions which have helped us to combat the crisis. So I think that only the elements that already used to be present in our culture are even more present now, and they're much more visible. We see them more clearly. We see how important they are. So we who are artists, who deal in literature, for us this will obviously be a basis, a foundation to somehow try and change something in the way we see things. But I think that this, of course, there will be changes. I'm not saying there won't, but I'm not sure they will be as big politically or social-wise. These won't be big turmoils that will completely change our lives. I'm saying that there will be changes of paradigms, but we will strive to go back to how we lived before. And these are these changes that were introduced by the crisis, but we will see what will happen once the crisis ends. So, I am all for using facts to create narratives which will be able to use as elements of exchange but I'm really not sure that all of this will produce as big changes in our society. Thank you very much. So let's move on. Maybe, Mr. Danilov. Hello, I would like to say hi to everybody. I would like to pay your attention to the aspect of the crisis which pertains, aspect of the corona crisis, and an aspect of the pandemic. I would like to speak about freedom and safety. Benjamin Franklin famously said, I will now paraphrase, people who are ready to make make exceptions when it comes to their safety. They're not dignified to be safe or to be free. This is a quote from one of the founding fathers. And at the example of the corona, we've seen a very interesting image. The entire population of the modern Western world, and I tend to count Russia and Serbia as parts of the Western world. So the Western world has unanimously chosen, and they agreed that they would like to give, give a part of their freedom, to give up on a part of their freedom. So in all countries of the Western world, freedom of movement, of work was seriously limited. Also the freedom of business. And in my opinion, I haven't carefully followed the situation, but there were no serious protests. There were no issues raised about what the impact will be, and how okay it was to limit the freedoms of people. All people unanimously agreed that in order to save lives and because of safety, all of the people agreed to give up on a part of their freedom. It's very easy to bring all of these people living in the Western society to lead them into isolation. This has somehow been traditional, and there are similar myths in the Western world. So I agree with Mr. Moga, who said that these myths are now formed, and this is a new relationship towards the freedom and safety, and we will continue designing these myths for decades to come, or maybe centuries to come. It's very interesting to think about this, and I would like to ask you, don't think that I'm against quarantine or lockdown measures, but the phenomenon that there was no single protest is very interesting. I suppose we can speak about a global shift in freedom which is taking place before our eyes, and freedom is no longer the most important thing. Now safety has the bigger value. This is something that we need to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, in this first round, we are yet to hear our Canadian colleague, Mr. Thyssen. Please, you have the floor. Switch on the mic, please.
Thank you very much. And thank you for everybody who's organized the Counterpoint, and I'm delighted and honored to be here. I believe that myth is really the stories that we tell ourselves, for better or for worse. And I'm interested in how the current situation is going to reveal new myths that we're going to tell ourselves, both on the good side and on the bad side of things, because I believe that we tell ourselves these myths in order to understand something that we cannot comprehend. And when those myths have no resonance anymore, they die. So, for example, I live in a country that is 10 million square kilometers that covers 5.5 time zones. And that as a modern nation is only 150 years old. But I currently live on land that people have lived on for 8,000 years. That is the home of indigenous people here who have had their own mythologies for much, much longer than the white settlers, of which I am part of, have colonized this place. And so right now in our country, yes, the coronavirus is a very, very important story. And there's a lot of mythologies going to be born out of that about how do we understand this? How do we tell each other stories in which we can understand this? But we're also seeing some mythologies die here and some be resurrected. For example, in Canada right now, there is a real death of this mythology that we told each other for 200 or 300 years, which was, frankly, that white colonialism was the best thing for this land, and that myth is now dying, and old myths of the indigenous people of this country are rising. One of the most famous myths is of the eagle and its wisdom and the eagle feathers. And that is starting to become, those mythologies of the ancient people and the indigenous people who still live on this land are starting to be resurrected in a way that we can learn from. And so I think the big question is going to be for us is, what are these new or old myths that we're going to use to tell each other how we can live in a world in which we are doomed to die? And sometimes that is going to be a positive myth, and sometimes it's going to be a negative myth. And often those myths are competing against each other for value in the culture. Thank you.
Zahvaljujem.
Thank you. So let me add some of my own thoughts about the myth about the coronavirus. It's quite possible that now we are witnessing the birth of a new myth. The myths that we know are inherited from the previous generations and civilizations and historical structures that used to exist. If we start from a relatively clear assumption that the things described in the myths never happened in that very precise way that, as described in the myths, but did happen in a similar way. They could have happened in the way described in the myth, and the contents of the myth is very strongly related to the one's reality, the reality that used to exist. If we start from that assumption, today, we are perhaps witnessing the creation of a myth that's called raising the man after its decline. We are witnessing the tragic consequences of this virus, which has led, among other things, to some kind of regeneration of nature. We see that the otherwise very polluted channels in Venice are now very clean. The pollution level above the planet has been reduced. And the impression is that owing to this big calamity that physically affected people and led to many deaths, this calamity has led to some kind of rejuvenation of nature. So there's the element for the creation of a myth. So mankind is on a decline due to its greed and consumerism and the unprecedented destruction of nature and the natural habitat. And then nature, wanting as a mythical hero to punish mankind, nature brings danger in the form of a disease, which then again leads mankind to a return to the previous order. All elements of myth exist. We have the hero we have the decline, we have the demise, and now what we have now, but we do not know whether there will be a rebirth of this hero and its raise from the ashes, so to speak, cured from the sins from the past. Many elements of myth are there. We are awaiting for this finale, and time will tell if this new generation of mankind will be even the principal hero of a myth. Thank you.
Emir? I didn't hear you very well, but I would like to add something. I have a very good title for this social phenomenon of new biological value. This is fear and genes are never out of fashion. And this is how I would characterize the duality of the corona. I've seen a YouTube clip in which a French Nobel Prize winner proved that the corona was in fact produced in a lab and that he has evidence that this is true, or the sequences on this diagram that he compares, that it shows actually that the value of the corona is a new virus. So he was on a TV show where he tried to prove that this was something which is not natural, and then it happened that 4 journalists, just like 4 eagles mentioned by our colleague, they tried to persuade him that he is saying a sentence which is equal to an H-bomb. And he just wanted to say that he has the authority and that he can very clearly prove to everybody if a virus was produced artificially. Maybe this was done in the best possible intentions to cure HIV, for example. So the force that the journalist used to attack this scientist reminded me of the duality of this myth. There is a truth in the source. Personally, and this doesn't have to mean that I believe conspiracy theories. I believe in crypto history that shows us what happened, but much later on. The basic idea that leads me to doubt this virus is one of the new paths that was established through new virtual channels in which the human consciousness is becoming a part of the fiction, created very easily, especially based on this idea that fear and genes never go out of fashion. So this creates a new phenomenon, new sociological phenomenon, which hasn't been known until now. So what separates Corona from a set of disasters that happened ever since civilization existed? For example, Constantinople was destroyed practically by the plague, and then optically, Corona reminds me of the weapon of our national hero, Marko the Prince. But is this the real shape of the Corona or not? I don't know. But what we do see is that Corona is very efficient political tool. It is a very good market product. We see that there are, let's say, people in Marseille are being treated by two medications, one of which is used by Donald Trump, and on the other hand we have a company called Rene Svimir, I'm not sure, and they say that this is not true, this is not valid actually. So I'm sure that we have many keys in our hands to unlock these myths. I think that we are clever enough to decipher them. one of the main generators of world mythology now is the internet, and it used to be TV. And it's giving us difficult tasks that we cannot solve right now. Why? Because we are frightened. How are we prepared for the corona? In our awareness and in our lives, a long time ago, the reality shows have moved in. The world drama. And this is something which means that now we have a type of art which is not a work of art. And on the other hand, we have everyday life in which so few things happen that arts and literature are unimportant. Where does this happen? This happens in those points so reality shows allow us. This was difficult to interpret. We had some technical issues. But anyway, in this care for the environment that exploded in this young girl called Greta, who crossed the ocean easier than this clever eagle, and she was trying to spread this idea about the protection of the environment, but we have forgotten that the basis of every freedom is man. So once you try to reduce the freedom, and since we live in the time which is more virtual than not, we are now speaking about a topic for which a French biologist says that it's a myth. I'm sorry, I'm not getting this. So how should we relate to this? Should we feel fear as a category with a mythic dimension, or should we ask the biologist to join us and maybe give us more information with his authority as a Nobel laureate? So simply to tell us whether corona really has been patented. He says that this was done in the best possible intent. And then maybe we can see the consequences in another way, not only biologically, but we are suffering major consequences in our social organization and in our social communities that we're living in, where freedom has been reduced before this next step, which unfortunately can be so authoritative that it will be a big problem. So just one parameter, Jeff Bezos, with $300 billion, has now increased his wealth to 550. So was the Spanish flu after the First World War? This was a much bigger pandemic, obviously, than this one. And this pandemic has received basically a winner who is now a part of all of our lives, exactly because of the fear that we've mentioned, or just like Vlada said, there is no mythology that hasn't been initiated with a grain of truth. So are we dealing with this grain of truth? Is the virus really a spontaneous natural occurrence, or was it created by somebody and it's now a part of our lives and prevents us from meet, and we have to now talk online? And to try and prove that life has actually lost its basic purpose and that we are now in the online atmosphere.
So until you were talking about all these issues that we face and which are imposed upon us, it's completely natural to think that it was some kind of media manipulation or political manipulation, which always happens and which is much more effective in the modern time. So it came to my mind that, well, this is my personal choice, but I believe that many more people or readers would embrace it, that, for example,
moderna književna dela.
three modern books that are
Poem, remek dela.
really
Majstori
works of art, Master and Margarita of Bulgakov, Ulysses Joyce is,
recimo Thomas Mann, Josif i njegova braća.
and for example Thomas Mann's Joseph and his brothers. All these books
Razgradnjom
are about destruction of a myth through an individual ironic humor.
jer dok s jedne strane
Because while the skepticism exists in every person, and every person was skeptical naturally about what was happening and everything that was behind these erosion of personal liberties imposed by the media,
koji mogu dovesti
which may lead
do bukvalnog manipuliranja
to
s mogućnostima
the manipulation of the possibilities that can exist in this world.
umetničko delo još uvek
A work of art remains an opportunity,
film,
be it a film, a book.
uvek postoji šansa
There is always an opportunity, there's always a chance that our
duhovit, ironičan odnos
skeptical and ironic attitude
razbije tu sliku koja
to
je stvarno monotona
destroy this monolithic picture
svugde.
broadcast, so to speak, by the political
Sad je
leaders in every country.
gde je ta vrhuška? Da li je ona u
And of course, we may ask ourselves whether these leaders are prime ministers or presidents or some other people above them.
otpora?
But what can we do to resist?
Mogućnost našeg otpora je to.
This is what we can do, skepticism.
I zbog ovakve
Of course, people can change. The question is whether people can change due to this kind of event. No, I think not. We will remain egoistic and jealous, so we will remain the same. However, the work of art created by an artist, it can
a za umetnike smatram mi
be this factor. And when I say artists, I mean also free thinkers, out of the box, people of all trades
ne potpadaju pod
who do not succumb to propaganda and manipulation,
svakodnevne ove sredstva kojima
bombarded, that we are bombarded with from the mass media.
znači tog umetnika. Da putem filma ili knjiga
Artists may, in books or films, discover a completely new world.
s jedne strane
On one hand, you have
kugu,
Camus' The Plague, which is quite dark a book.
mogla da čitam,
I couldn't read it, frankly,
mada se sa puno tih stvari u
although I agree with many of these things when it comes to human nature. On the other hand, there is Bulgakov,
se tako superno igra
which
tome
toys with these topics in a superior way,
ko može
not hiding the fact that politics can be, but playing with all this,
svim tim sa svim tim kako bih rekao
playing with this manipulation in a creative way. This is what the artists can do. Because we mustn't forget
zaboraviti da
that one of the main
jedan od glavnih
characteristics of these myths is the fact that
da je individualni
the individual
iskorak
procedure, the individual act, even when it's tragic, this is the only way to resist
odupreti se toj
this collective
kolektivnoj u stvari manipuliranoj
manipulative narrative.
da mi oduvek
And if we choose this path of individuality, we have the possibility to resist. We have the possibility to think, to have dilemmas.
mogućnost dileme
And this is a chance.
i to je šansa
This is, of course, an individual chance for artists. Otherwise, those that say that this experience will change the psyche of men, I'm skeptical. I think it will not change the psyche of men.
Thank you. Who's next?
Yeah, I do think we live in a turn of time, in fact, and we are on the way, and we have to be careful not to let it be like this to a mystification, for instance, of this virus. As we could see, the virus made it clear that. Can you hear me? The virus made it clear that the weakness of mankind. Yeah, but this weakness came out and derived out of an expansion. Let's talk about agriculture, agro-industry expansion. And it's very likely that this virus came out of a sort of a jumping over the gate, over the barrier between mankind, between human beings and animals, between wilderness and agro-industrial complex. Yeah, and so this expansion of mankind, which we can see in every aspect, can be seen as its weakness. And this is the mystification of the virus is underway, and I think this is the most dangerous thing, to mystify the virus, to make a myth out of it, because that leads to an instrumentalization of this virus in all sorts of things. Some people instrumentalize the virus to make a better world, an ecological, more ecological being on the world, which may be wonderful for many aspects. Others use it for political authoritarianism. And as Amy Kusturica also stated, many use it for economic interests.
I actually have a question for one of my colleagues, and I'm wondering if Thea Obreit, can I ask you a question, please? You were talking about how the mythology might change, and that we might see a mythology grow in the future where there is no end to the struggle. And I'm wondering how you might see that play out in different kind of art forms. And particularly, we are all, let's just say that the most popular myths that across generations right now are not necessarily ancient myths from Greek mythology, although those are still very relevant, but they are popular myths in culture like Star Wars or even, Batman, things like this that go across the world, around the globe. These are the popular myths that are in our world today and are used to talk about whatever the cultural problem is of the time, whether it's coronavirus or AIDS or other issues, inequality that is happening around the world. So, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see the potential of art to change because of what's happening in the world right now.
Sure. Right. I think, what you were saying earlier about myths serving as a way to teach us how to live in a world where we're doomed to die, I think is very relevant to the narrative structures that they have prompted in us as a culture, right? I think one of the reasons why we tend towards stories that portray the end of the struggle is because it is necessary for us to believe that a crisis can end in a single lifetime, right? The myths that you're talking about as being a product of popular culture, as opposed to the ancient myths that taught us how to exist as humans at all, teach us how to exist as individuals, right? You are called the myth of the hero. You are the hero, you are called, or you volunteer for a particular task, you overcome it, and then you return home with what you've learned. And it is your individual knowledge that brings about the change that ends the dilemma. And the convenience of that is that you get to see the dilemma, you get to put a tourniquet on the dilemma before the end of your own lifetime, and it becomes this individualized project that allows your debt and participation in the greater history of your own society to be limited to a heroic act. When in truth, the way life works is, missions go unaccomplished all the time. In fact, I believe that Bulgakov didn't actually finish the Master and Margarita in his own lifetime, right? It was put together by the last couple of chapters were put together by his wife. He didn't even, not only did he not get to see the impact that it had on the world, but he didn't even get to see the product finished. And so how will this change our mythologies? Or how would it change our mythologies? I think it would be interesting to see our narrative preoccupations shift away from individual to community in across all art forms. How that would come about, it's hard to conceptualize, as I am a product of my narrative history.
I would now like to add one thing that I think it's the right time to say this right now. So, in a broader sense, the writers of novels, writers, and composers, and film directors, here we all have different representatives of different types of art. So, all of them, including painters, obviously. So they have this effect on people on the same level of awareness, and this is the same level that myths have an effect on. So these are images and representations which are aimed to create a new value filled with symbols, regardless if it's a musical composition or a painting or a novel or a sculpture, whatever. So they focus on this same part of the awareness, of human awareness, just as myths, and they should have the same effect. In other words, by liberalizing communication in the contemporary world, we have in fact now come to the point where artists are modern creators of myths. Somebody will create a persuasive myth which will have this transcending value, that will have a strong effect on the human emotions, beliefs, and so on. But of course there will be weaker myths which will last only as long as they're, let's say, played in the cinemas and so on. What I want to say is the strength of culture and the strength of art today is maybe even bigger than we expect. And artists, thanks to the great possibilities for the reach of their work, regardless on the language barriers or cultural barriers or different types of differences that exist between different peoples, actually they have this universal symbolical tool that they can use, and they can use it for bad or for good. It's up to the artists. They have this huge historical challenge to use all of their strength positively and to try and have a positive effect on people. There are many examples where artists acted throughout the history, but the availability of culture has never been as big as it is now. So artists, as modern let's say druids or creators of myths, they can have large creativity at their disposal, but they also can be very destructive with their work. So this is also a question of moral and of ethics of people who use this gift. Thank you.
Izvolite.
Please.
En relación con, bueno, En relación a lo que hemos estado hablando antes,
In relation to this topic
en fin, a mí me gustaría hacer alguna
that
observación
we are discussing, I would like to observe something
y que también ha rondado en las intervenciones de los
as to
demás,
what Mr. Danilov said and, well,
ese juego
the
entre
others
de
mentioned
manera el miedo
about this game and this between freedom and security and fear, this trade-off. And as your moderator, you asked a different question. I would like to make a remark. Well, speaking about the influence of art on the creation of myth, I would like to be skeptical once again, and I prefer this because I think that psychologically it's healthier. Essentially, I'm a poet, and poets in today's time, with, well, rare exceptions, we are accustomed to our work being underappreciated. And it doesn't contribute to myths. Sometimes it's not enough even to have readers, and science, culture, society we live in, well, makes our influence a minimal. I don't feel as a poet that is a creator of myths. I do not think that I have such an impact. I consider myself the creator of poetry. But speaking about the creation of myths, so how they are created, someone does create them. They are a work of humans, part of culture, civilization. They are not born. They don't fall from the sky. They're not a divine creation. We are the ones creating myths, people, society. I do not want to drift away, but it would be nice to analyze how and by which mechanisms society creates myths. Yes, through art, but through art and through people. So who, which people, what is the decisive factor for the creation of myths? I believe that this is one of the factors that influences social relations as such. The market economy, market developments, they are developing and determining whether people will, how they will live and what will be interesting to them. So these market developments are creating stories that ultimately are embraced and understood as the majority of society, as some kind of stories about truth, about stories that explain and describe our living and our existence in this world. It seems to me, at least this is what I noticed, that modern myths, not classical and ancient myths, modern myths, contemporary myths that we create, we participate in, these are myths that are coming from some foreign worlds, from worlds of ancient and faraway arts. Myths, for example, related to sports. Sports are a planetary phenomenon, economically important phenomenon. Our society didn't create them, but it's guided by certain economic rules, determining the market or production in 90% of the cases. In 90% of the cases, this is the way things go. Our society is predetermined by the economic system that we all share and that we all suffer, although sometimes it may be beneficial. So myths created by advertising, for example. I know that, well, it has certain similarities to art, but let's just look at the myths created by advertising on different media platforms. They're extremely strong. They're are having a strong impact on the way we think, on the way we live. Maybe there are writers or artists participating in this advertising world, and I think that this is more related to other topics and circles of power and creation. This is yet another topic. Who has the power to create myths? Is it us as poets and writers and directors? Or do we live in a society which is radically determined by economic mechanisms? All the mythology of today is related to the business world, to the world of success, or catastrophe, which is, again, related to economy, winners or losers, as they say in the West. Everything is related to power and to money, which gives us this power. The circle is such that the must is to gain more capital in order to gain more power. This is the modern myth, and this is what we need to address in terms of, well, understanding it, changing it, perhaps. We are also speaking about changing the myth in order to come to other worlds where perhaps something better will emerge. But this whole field, which is not artistic, is in a way the most fertile ground for creation.
I want to respond to Mr. Moga a bit, because I found some of his words quite fascinating. First of all, I want to applaud him for being a poet, because I think that's actually the main way that myths are communicated is through poetry, which to me is a very oral, a very verbal tradition. And I think that whether you go to the ancient Greeks and the mythologies that were passed down through song and through speaking them, and not necessarily by reading them, that the power of poetry has ultimately the ultimate power on how myths are transmitted from generation to generation. And all you need to do is to look at children in a playground. And in fact, the other day I was watching some kids play outside here in Canada, and there was two sets of plays that were happening. One was one was playing a protester and one was playing a police officer. And the other myth that was being created amongst these children were a patient who had coronavirus and a doctor. And so it's the children who are transmitting ultimately the myths of who are they playing. We can start these myths. We can actually launch them through the art that we create, whether they're plays or poems or novels or films or whatever. But ultimately, we have to look at what is being transmitted to the next generation, because that's where the myths are living. They're living in children who are telling each other stories, telling stories to each other, who may not have even any writing capabilities. They may not even have any language capabilities. And coming back to where I come from, in my country, where the indigenous people have an oral tradition, their myths have been passed down through generations by grandfathers and grandmothers telling their stories to other generations. I think that's where the myths are transmitted. And so, Mr. Moga, I want you to know that as a poet, you're actually the purveyor of the myth. You were launching myths into the world. And I think that that's the strength of being a poet as opposed to any other occupation. Thank you.
Izvolite, gospodine Danilov.
Mr. Danilov?
Я бы хотел тоже откликнуться на реплику.
I would like to comment to what Mr. Moga said. I agree with you that forming modern myths, prose and poetry is not participating as much. So the role of literature is on the downfall. Books still can be basis for myths, but it's difficult to compete with Hollywood, for example. So pop culture is a broad notion. This is not just about popular music, films, and TV shows, but many people are also part of this. Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, they're also the ones who create powerful myths. And literature is lagging behind. We as writers should admit that the world is becoming less and less oriented towards literature. Words mean less and pictures mean more. This is something we need to accept, and we need to continue to work in such conditions. I don't see anything terrible about this. We need to understand that the time has passed in which, many persons such as Tolstoy, Chekhov, Kafka and others, they used to rule the world, actually, and we will not rule the world now. We will not rule the thoughts of the people. This is a sad thing, but we need to accept this. Thank you.
So the idea about the function, public function, social function of the artist has disappeared. At the time when I was a student, what Bergman and Antonioni did, what they were saying, was the benchmark for all young filmmakers. We are living at a time where the market determines 90% of our capacity, mental and intellectual capacity. We're living in absolute domination of the market, which from the social contract of Rousseau in France has been successfully alienating our characteristics, all until the big sociological analysis of Walter Saul, who said that, I'm mentioning film authors because, these filmmakers used to be closer to the audience than the writers, the wider audience. We are living at a time of proliferation of all possible products, and unfortunately in the 70s, when the Taxi Driver was made by Scorsese as a version of Crime and Punishment, a Protestant version of Crime and Punishment, a film that included all the elements of social and individual political aspect. Today it is classified into different genres, and the function of the narrator has been lost in the market. We are speaking about a good side of something that I fought all my life. This is the availability of all the relevant carriers of book and film. We are living in a mass culture today where individual acts have been successfully marginalized. There is no other mythology than the Hollywood mythology. The only prevailing mythology is Hollywood, which also has its very strong propaganda side. This is the only existing mythology which transcends this filter and which is becoming history, whether it's cost-effective or not. In the US, we have very good writers. One of my favorite is Jonathan Franzen, which created his books based on this myth on the American way of life. This myth was started a long time ago when Hollywood was created as the center of the idealism in the world. Idealism is mentioned today as our Spanish colleague said, it's mentioned when good poetry is written and when it should be applied, so to speak, as an act of humanity, which can do good to people. It is prevented because it is not cost-effective. The same with films, the same with literature and all other forms of classic art. we are speaking about new art, which was created at the end of last century, and we are speaking about the continuation of mythology. Every mythology must have its... I'm sorry. So we cannot interrupt the Greek myths by installation. It will remain living. We cannot forget about Seneca because he is at the root of every serious thinking. But we can, of course, speak about a vast area where we are flooded daily by millions of artifacts which do not have their own social function. So the creation of new myths, the last myth I know is Harry Potter. Harry Potter is the reincarnation of the mythological idea, well, believe in the future as if it was the past. He is into magic. And I'm sorry, we have trouble hearing Mr. Kusturica. Because Harry Potter, objectively speaking, should be embraced as an existing myth. Other myths, such as a line of author films that we know, they are for personal use. They are for personal excitement. But their social function in terms of doing good and catharsis and joy, they do not exist because the Hollywood propaganda as a myth is completely prevailing. They have taken center stage, chasing all other forms of art away. Simply, the main generator of mythological forms of life is Hollywood.
Thank you, Emir. I think that we're moving in the right direction. Who wants to be next? I would just like to add to what Emir said. He actually talked about one of the key things related to Corona. So, namely, this is basically a human issue and an issue of values, even though it has been structured into a culturological matter. So, on the one hand, we have this popular culture, so to say, and the other one, which has now received a marginal, let's say, quality. This is the elite culture. So now people use contempt and mark as old-fashioned as something which doesn't guarantee income or popularity. This all pertains to elite art. So it seems that Corona may be, I see that all of us have the same opinion, it will start this discussion about what we are doing and whether this is good enough. And maybe we can be encouraged by choosing this elitist, artistic view of the world. So the question is, once again, I will add to what I started at the beginning with the Minotaur and the labyrinth. So the Daedalus was the one who constructed the labyrinth. So he was the type of the artist who cared about technology most. So he wanted to be able to go underground to something which is demonic, and then to think also of a way to fly. So he had these different ideas. So he wanted to go, and because of his son, to go with his son, and because of his son, to start flying. And you know how this ends, obviously. Their wings get burned, and Icarus falls down and dies. So, why did I say this? I think that often the destiny, the fate of artists in our time is the fate of Icarus. Regardless of good critiques or a good reception, with a small group of readers or viewers, and that this final age in which the Icarus, the artist, tried to gain a bigger audience. This is the audience, rock and roll. So the rock and roll was the last time when Icarus was able to get more people to listen to them. So there were artists like Hendrix, Janis Joplin, The Doors, and so on. It's not strange that they had such difficult ends. They were simply burned. They were unsuitable for massive and popular culture. I'm sharing this from my personal experience because when I was young, I used to play rock and roll. And I know what the impact was at the time, what the impact the rock and roll had on the audience at the time. It was remarkable. And what is the impact today of pop music, which is often served or always served through TV stations? These performers are even more popular, but the value has dropped significantly. Compare one of, let's say, a rock standard, any rock standard, with what you can find today on the first position in the top charts. It's the same as with films, what Emir said. It was different watching Bergman's films, Antonioni's films, even Hitchcock, because he is this artist who is possibly, I don't want to okay, but Emir is the same guy. He doesn't want to make any exceptions. He does what he believes in. But anyway, for example, another big movie director, Kubrick, who was completely dedicated to his opus. Now they're making a remake of his film in which Jack Nicholson played, probably The Shining. And compared to the original, to what this first film meant, I'm not only talking about the impact, but I'm talking about deeper layers, about seeing such a film. So when you're seeing such a film, then you get goosebumps, or you are laughing all the time, or you're enjoying yourself, and then you speak about this for days on afterwards. Now movies are focusing on income. So going back to the Corona issue, maybe I'm going back to this individually in every one of us. This will encourage us to continue to follow what we want to do, because mechanisms of popularity are quite clear, of Hollywood, of top lists, and so on. So what's and I will also like to refer to what the Spanish poet said. My answer will be, we need to right now be aware that this is our world. Do you think that the Corona situation will change how profits are made? No, I don't believe this. But I do believe, you mentioned Bulgakov. Bulgakov was not famous during his lifetime, neither was Kafka. Many great artists, even Joyce, had the same faith. So if we talk about literature, but they worked on this. This was their world. This was their obsession. And this is not something you can run away from. It's not about betrayal. Emir, for example, makes movies, starting from his first movies when father was away in business. You remember Dolly Bell and so on. because he believes in this world. He is living in it. And I think that this is, okay, maybe this sounds funny, but anyway, right now he found encouragement. We can find encouragement to do things which will not become internationally popular, but you will always have your own group of fans, so to say. So, who's the only good ally? Time. Because there are future readers, there are future viewers. It's not only important to be popular right now and to be a star right now. It's important how you will last, how your works will last or be received by the later generations of art, of viewers and readers.
The question was how society creates myths.
Okay.
And yeah, they can create myths in different forms, in different ways. We see it through art. We see creating myths through politics or through economic forces. And if it is true what Mr. Moga said, that we are determined by economic system, we have to put the question, how come that now, with the corona crisis, politics, nation state is so strong? That's a very interesting question we have to deal with, I think. Political power and economic interest normally is in a way linked always, but in crisis time, political power took over the floor. And I think it's historically, you can see it was always the same procedure when there was a cyclical shift or a cyclical change. Nation state was very much needed for capital, for market economy. And now we have this exactly this system at the moment. I would ask you if you think this is the right discussion if you make it like this.
This is not a question, this is an acknowledgement. This is not even an issue, because the world that determines the main historical flows and economic flows, this world has stumbled. We are living at a time when the population of the US, of this brave new world, are losing faith in their own system. The Roman Empire was at its peak, and it didn't fail, not because it didn't fail because of the barbarians, but because of its own population was completely detached from the current economic and political system. Now, the demise, the lack of trust in the health system of the world led to the conclusions, one of which was that the healthcare system within the nation states are reorganized in order to survive. The WHO didn't have a response for this sudden blow inflicted by the coronavirus, and then, well, naturally, things came back to the nation states. This was not a choice by the nation states. Simply, it was the way things were.
I mean, there's sort of a lot to parse here, and I'd like to go back to something that was being said about the role of the artist in absorbing, changing, delegating mythology, and how it pertains to power. I think I have a formed thought here. I'll get through it. I think that in any discussion about the role of myth, there are sort of two competing poles, right? One is the folk tale, and one is dogma or propaganda. myths on their surface and at their most central function serve in order, as Mr. Thiessen was saying, to allow people to tell themselves about themselves, right? It's an origin story, and it's a point of inclusivity. If I learn a mythology, I am part of it. I become part of the community that uses this mythology to understand itself, and then I can actually be a proponent of this mythology and pass it forward. As such, smaller mythologies, regional mythologies, serve as points of resistance when imperial powers or economic powers come in and try to overtake larger systems. The danger of myth is very relative to its proximity to power. And there is a particular balance in which a myth is large enough to encompass the feelings of a people, the perspective of a people, the social or psychological energy of a people, and to be useful to it, and in which it crosses over into the political function of a larger state and becomes dogma. And the artist, I think, the role of the artist is to stand somewhere in between and try to prevent the latter thing from happening while being able to feed mythos back to the people from whom it actually comes, right? Back to the folk. Whether that mythos is narrative, whether it's economic, whether it's musical. I actually agree with you. I think that the music might sort of be the last bastion where that was true for a long time, where music was able to incur sustained change back to the people before it was, absorbed into a larger propagandistic system. So that's my thought. I had another point, but I've forgotten it.
I want to continue, or to say a few words as to what Mr. Prokopiev and Emir Kusturica said, that the role of nation states is on the rise. I didn't think about that, but for example, in Russia, in the case of Russia, I can say that this is the way things are happening. In the last couple of years, and well, now due to the coronavirus pandemic, the sense that we are not connected to the world is growing, and well, this is the mood of people, isolationist mood. I'm a patriot and I love Russia. But I always felt as a citizen of the world. And personally, I was open-minded. I always wanted for Russia to be part of a big world and not some kind of fortress. However, this, fortress mentality is present with many people in Russia. I don't believe that it will become some kind of big myth, but a small one perhaps. And I think that due to these changes, the way that Corona impacted the world, many people in the world will feel the same way. When people are afraid, when they are facing fear with an invisible enemy, this is this terrible aspect of the virus, that it's invisible. People want to, shut down, to hide in some kind of hole, to hide in their own homes. And, it looks like this kind of mood and sensation with people will grow. We thought that Europe is such that everybody was living together, and now perhaps it's better for everyone to be living in their own nation state, in their own small pretty home in their small country or big country such as Russia. And this is the way, apparently, that we will have a good life. We will introduce order, establish order, we will live, well, a peaceful life, and, well, not minding about how other people live. I think that this is a way people will feel increasingly in the world. Thank you.
It seems that it is really on the rise. We now have a sort of a state-run economy with this lockdown. We have a state-run capitalism, and it seems that this sort of society is superior to what we consider to be superior in the Western Atlantic, transatlantic society, the democracies. Yeah? This corresponds a bit with new leading sectors in our society, the medical pharmaceutical complex, or also the control industry, cybernetic production forms, artificial intelligence, things like that. They take over the form from the old industrial complexes. And I think this is to be considered if we speak of a role of the state, nation state, or supranation state, and the forces, the economic forces.
Empezaré por el final, por lo que una cosa que ha observado ahora el señor Hofbauer.
I would like to add to what Mr. Hofbauer said. Yes, there truly are certain levels, social levels right now that now have gained certain, let's say, prestige because of the because of what we have given them during this fight, during the coronavirus crisis. But on the other hand, I'm talking about Spain most of all. I think that all of us have learned to identify certain occupations, certain roles, certain social roles that we didn't think about in the past. We didn't pay much attention to them. But now, in the time of crisis, isolation, we have discovered, in fact, what their true value is. And without them, we couldn't survive during this isolation. I'm speaking about couriers, workers in shops, nurses, technicians in hospitals, not only doctors, but the whole system, police officers, traffic police. So many people who didn't used to have any kind of prestige. And we as citizens weren't even aware they existed. I admit that I didn't think about them and about their vocations. I didn't see them as necessary for the social order. But they did the most basic things. They kept places clean. They submitted or sent or transported food to people. They helped the ill. They helped us. Us get supplies. I think that this is something which has now been uncovered. And if we talked about national states, nationalism, and so on, the interesting thing is that when we had this planetary pandemic, the international pandemic, the interesting thing was that the answer was not planetary, or it was maybe somewhat planetary, but it wasn't sufficient, obviously. There were state responses. Every state closed their borders. We set up control checkpoints. This is still in power. So we tried, each of the countries tried to get supplies that were necessary. And we somehow, all of us, competed with each other. So there were some conflicts at this economic market to get the necessary resources. We understood how dependent we are from Chinese production for many supplies. So before this international challenge, we had national answers. And I think, at least this is my belief, the answer is in this myth of the fatherhood, a myth of the motherland. So, the motherland as your country of origin, your individual origin, throughout we as individuals, without we as individuals wouldn't exist. Obviously, this was supported by different economic factors. And in this myth, all countries turned into small bunkers. They were isolated, and they wanted to give their own individual responses to this pandemic. Finally, I just wanted to say two more things about different comments that all of you had. I think Mr. Kusturica talked about proliferation of products. I have an anecdote that I just remembered. In the Spanish newspaper, there was a survey in which people were asked about what kind of activities they did during isolation. So, during the lockdown, during the quarantine, was it watching TV, listening to music, exercising? So, what were the activities they mostly did? But 1.5% of people, of respondents, said that they were writing during the quarantine. 1.5% of the population was writing. So 1.5% of the Spanish population, this is around 800,000 people, roughly speaking. So 800,000 people allegedly were writing. Whatever it was, whether it was diaries, whether it was small articles or novels, plays. So 800,000 people in a rather small country, because Spain is not a big country compared to other big countries. So for me, this was, I'm not sure if this is a positive thing or not, but anyway, for me, this information was kind of frightening, because I'm not really sure if this is too positive. The people decided to kill time by writing, but if this will contribute, I'm not sure if this will contribute to the development of literature. In the past, the writers were the ones who were writing. Now everybody is starting to write. I'm not sure what will come out of this, and I'm not sure if this is something we should recommend. But in any case, I'd like to finish with this. Speaking about the public, the audience today and the audience of tomorrow, there was a big Spanish poet, Luis Cernuda. He was born in 1927, and he is probably one of the 3 or 4 best poets of the 20th century in Spain. And he said that he was also a poet. I think that this can apply to all literary genres. He said that when we are not writing, we are not communicating only with today's audience. We have to bear in mind that we are talking to the audience of the future, of tomorrow, and we have to speak to them as writers, as authors, as artists. It's not only about our contemporaries, about our neighbors. This is about people who will come in the future. Walt Whitman has a very interesting, very short poem in which he says and speaks directly to somebody who was born 100 years later after the poem was written. So to a person who would be born in 1970 or 80, something like that. And he speaks to this person with such closeness, as if they were neighbors. And this is the remarkable thing about poetry. So this is where I think that this is the path, and this is the way how myths can survive. I'm not sure if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but this is something I'm trying to follow. I always want to address future readers, not only the present ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moga. Just a comment from my side now. I'm not sure that it is bad that people started writing during the lockdown. If we go back to our main story about the myth, in one of the most famous philosophical myths, Plato's myth about the cave, as we know, people are attached, cannot move, and they are looking only in front of themselves, a very narrow space where they see are only shadows of things, people, and other phenomena that are happening behind them, and they are seeing only the shadows. And then when something breaks these chains, they're attached to the wall of the cave they are going outside, and they cannot comprehend the whole wealth of the world that they were looking just in the monochromatic way, as shades, shadows. And this was the basis of thinking about the human perception and the complexity of psychological phenomena. Why have I taken this myth of Plato? Because the modern society reminds me, the fate of men in the contemporary era reminds, in a way, of the fate of Plato's hero, that it's in the cave. Plato's heroes are looking in the wall and seeing shadows, and the modern man, well, I'm simplifying here, but is looking in the entertainment industry, looks into the TV screen, looks at the stupid propaganda messages in commercials, political programs, films, etc., etc. And now, when there is some kind of accident, in this case a pandemic, when it places people in a situation, people are going back to themselves, their families, to reading, interesting hobbies, and are trying to be disconnected. They're starting to experiment with the things that are not characteristic to them. Well, such a debate, of course, presents different angles of thinking. When many people are trying at the same time, when they're starting to write or to paint, regardless of their skills, when they start to film things around them, people in this way get not a monochromatic picture of their lives, a full chromatic status of their life. And this depends on their skills, but this is not important. What is important is the fact that in this way they will receive other content, and they are starting to live in a more diversified world, which will not be monotonous anymore.
I just wanted to say one thing that the Spanish colleague poet said, that the positive effect in Spain was the percentage of people writing was high, and that 800,000 people in Spain were writing during the corona crisis. I would like to add that it would be even better that 800,000 of them were reading, because, as I said at the beginning, in the proliferation of artistic works, this is how the world has become entrapped. The democratization of art, unfortunately, means it will end. The way we know it will probably end. The way we know it, the way we have known it since the Renaissance times. The other good thing is that human identity is an aesthetic one. So, it was once said that moral and aesthetics are one and the same. And I think that this democratic pattern that rules the world I'm sorry, we're not getting this. So people who learned how to read, I'm not sure that this idea is on the rise. I'm not sure that it's brought anything positive to the life of people, because by reading they're stopping time, and this is the only way how they prolong their lives, by not participating, by creating their own vision of thoughts, ideas as writers, creating a fiction which has been blocked today. The modern man is living between two TV shows they're watching on their iPhones, between two films, between the vast number of multiplied fictions which don't have the same plots, which improve their lives, which enrich their lives, which are present in high literature. I think that this act enriches, and this is the only thing that battles against the flow of time. And this also entails giving up on old ideas, such as the Christian civilization, Greek civilization, of these ideas that we received as myths through Christianity and through the Greek civilization. So in this clash of fictions that exist within us, these old ones and these newer ones which are practically worthless, and then this personal fiction mostly sides with the simple and vulgar examples of art. So I would prefer it if in these statistics 800,000 people were reading, because this would develop this emotional or ironic distance from the time that we're living in. Reading is, in fact, one of the few remaining intimate treasures left to humans, because this is the only way how they can leave the time that they're living in, and this is the only way how they can prolong their own lives.
So first, let me express my satisfaction for being able to gather here as neighbors, practically. I have a small garden in my home, and it's really great when I have neighbors coming. When we gather in our garden, let alone this kind of meeting. So all artists seem to be living in the same street, in the same neighborhood, and they're all neighbors, in my opinion. So now I want to build on our Spanish colleague, and a writer that we read all the time, even during the pandemic, Cervantes. Cervantes, who has become a world-famous writer, and whose Don Quixote and Sancho Panza are myths of invincibility, imagination, and a better life, as opposed to pragmatism and unilateralism offered by the modern times. One of the questions that you posed in your document at the beginning was the reviewing, in a way, cultures that we belong to, and whether today myth is a quest for truth, and does it possess cognitive value. I will go back once again to Spain, namely to Latin American writers, what is still, but in my student period, was the favorite literature. Marquez, Fuentes, etc., etc. Living on that continent where literature, in terms of genres and literary norms, individual literature was developed much later, and until the mid-19th century they didn't have any literature to speak of, to the end of the 19th century. And then there was an expansion, a boom, because they have a mythological treasure. These myths from the ancient population of the Latin America, these myths that in the mythical sense, it's a huge mythical material for life, individual life, personal life, political life. It gave birth to this fantastic literature, regardless if one lived in Cuba or regardless of one's personal background, rich, poor, etc. For example, when you look at the faith of, for example, Che Guevara, such a person was fed, so to speak, with this mythological matrix basis, which through language enables the creation of these works of art in a way. What's left to us here is to cherish this wealth that's embedded in the old stories, in the fragments of myths, in our folk treasure, so to speak, of the stories told to us by our ancestors, in our books, in our libraries, such as the one behind me. This is the wealth which cannot be erased by popular sitcoms on TV or some popular music, etc. This is something that we need at all times. This matrix, regardless whether it's from a small nation or from a big nation, these internal journeys, this is the kind of journey and traveling that I miss. I really take pleasure in traveling. And now with the borders that are closed, and this is also a topic, the ban on crossing the borders, the interdiction to visit a different, even a different home. Because, for example, the writers in this region, in the former Yugoslavia, are my friends. We are speaking the same languages. They are more exciting to me than business persons or directors that also live here. This is not my world. This is the writers are my world. This can be they can be an inspiration for a story or a book, to be the heroes of a story. But the essence of men is dialogue. Another big writer I'm reading is Montaigne, French writer. He has also experienced different pandemics, and then he retreated in his tower. He's a very natural writer, humane writer. He doesn't care. Montaigne retreated in his own world and started his own internal dialogue. He wrote his essays. When we read them today, it's as if they were written yesterday. This is what what is lacking for humans. This is something that's necessary. And again, I want to go back to my initial idea that the time of the pandemic is, in terms of what it brings, control, restriction of freedom, manipulation, political control. On the other hand, is perhaps
ljudi koji pišu. Možda je mogućnost
is an opportunity
ta ljudska osobina koja je nama neophodna.
for these human characteristics that we need to experience it in this small space. I don't like this Zoom and this virtual communication, but in the last couple of weeks I had a dozen of Zooms with people living in different countries in the world, sitting in their living rooms as we are today. But this is what we need. Not isolationism, not borders, not... we need something of some kind of fluency of human thinking and sensation and of life.
De lo que ha dicho Emir sobre lo que yo había dicho de las 800,000 personas.
I just like to build on what Emir said about 800,000 people who are writing and not as many are reading. Unfortunately, I have a feeling that this is so, at least in Spain. I'm not sure if it's the same in other countries. Everybody wants to be read, but very few people want to actually read. Everybody hopes that time will be dedicated to them, that the attention will be dedicated to their works, but on the other hand, they're not ready to dedicate their time to the works that have already been created. I think that this is, among other things, due to the phenomenon of democratization of culture. This democratization has its positive sides, but also negative effects and consequences, and one of them is the universalization and digitization as a basic tool for exchange. So, during this conversation, we mentioned TV many times as something which is a counterpoint to art or to literature, as a tool for entertainment, very superficial in its nature. But I think that this is not only about television. For example, my kids, who are in their 20s and 30s, they never watch television. Their friends don't do this either. I had some guests from Argentina. My generation still has this habit of watching TV. My TV broke down, and I asked them while they were here, is your TV working? And these were people of 30 and 40. And when I asked them this question, they said, no, we don't even have a TV set. So I think that the age, people between 18 and 40 probably don't watch TV anymore, but what they do is they spend time on social networks. They do things that we do right now. They use technology to talk, to be together, even though we're on different continents and in different countries, and even though we speak in different languages. But this dimension of social networks and the digital world in itself, which allows for the entire world to be able to think, to be able to write. Basically, this digital world does not include any filters. So this was the original idea, to avoid any kind of filter. For example, during the war, people should be able to communicate without any filter. So all people are inspired to write, because there's no third party that will say, no, this isn't right, you have to do more research, you have to read more, this is simply wrong, you have to get right information. No, everybody uses this simple language. They publish the things that they believe in, or they post the things that they believe in, using a medium which gives them access to the entire world without any filters or limitations. And the result is that they are leaving this traditional chain of literary communication. So, book, paper, publishing house. So before anything is published, something had to be written and put into a book, and then there were different filters. There were editors, publishers, critiques. And now there are no filters because we have the new media that have prevented this. So we are aware that this has happened. I'm not a teacher and I don't give lectures, but I am connected to young people and to young writers. And among young people between 20 and 30, you can find a lot of people who say, I don't read, I just write. For me, this is impossible. I can't understand this. This is not coherent. I mean, if you are writing, then this means that you've been reading. Had I not read, I wouldn't be able to write. So today it's quite common that everybody's writing because they feel that this is something quite simple. Everybody knows how to talk, and then they think that this is just a continuation of this skill. But they don't feel the need to read because this chain was interrupted somewhere. The chain that says you have to go through certain steps, through certain obstacles, through certain filters to publish your written word. Quality depends on many things, and I'm not the mirror of quality. But anyway, I feel that we have made this leap, which is now difficult to overcome. This digitization. We have many creators who create bad literature or simulations of literature, and we have created some cultural connections with this literary world. So, I mean, that's why I said 800,000 people were writing. And in the past, there were so few of us who were writing. But anyway, I agree. I hope that these 800,000 people, I mean, I wish that they were also reading, in addition to writing. I hope that they were writing good literary works. I'm not sure if this time will ever come back.
Yeah, I hear what Mr. Moga is saying, and I agree with it for the most part. But I'm not entirely sure that the desire to write always correlates to the desire to be read or to publish. It would be great to know that more people are reading. Not enough people are reading, obviously, and there is a glut of purported literary work that is out there. But all art begins as a journey of self-discovery and self-understanding before it accesses larger ideals. We value the artist because we privilege the artist's tools, the artist's expertise in articulating what we claim to be certain universal truths of humanity. But if the past few decades have shown us anything, it's how necessary the dismantling of the illusion of a single universal truth of humanity really is, and how tied that universal truth is to power structures. So, I don't know, it's heartening to me to hear that 800,000 people are finding their way to storytelling by personal means. It may not be great art. It certainly won't have the longevity of great art, but it is necessary storytelling. And I think it's necessary to building a kind of mythos, a bearing witness to this time. So, yeah.
Mr. Moga, yes, indeed, in the modern world, everybody is a writer. Everybody uses the internet, social networks. Everybody is writing something. In Russia, there are many, many people writing. We have two websites. One is called Stikhi.ru. This is poetry, and prose. Everybody can register and post their own text without any restrictions. I have looked at this poetry website, 846,000 authors, and for prose, 307,000 authors. There are many, many websites such as these. They're very popular. So people are writing a lot, really. That's incredible. In Russia, it's a privilege to be a writer, and many people want to become writers. Of course, we all realize that the writer cannot make a lot of money, they cannot become pop stars, but people do want to be writers. As simple as that. Because of the old times when the writers ruled the world, rule our thoughts, when every word of Leon Tolstoy was important, when the world was waiting for every word of Leo Tolstoy. But Mr. Moga mentioned filters, the filters that were used to exist between the manuscript and the publication. In order for text to be published, it had the publishing company had to accept it, and a seasoned writer or editor, proofreader, had to approve the text, to give a high mark, to publish it, to spend some money, and to publish a book. And this was the filter. And due to, for the failed writers that weren't that good, this was a technical, professional filter. And if you would go past this filter, one would become a professional writer. This is still there, it still exists. You have professional filters, and if you are publishing stories or poetry only on Facebook, you will be read by your friends or other people, perhaps. But nobody will take you seriously. Nobody will take you, will think you're a writer or a poet. They will say, well, he's writing stuff, it's not bad, etc. In order to become a professional writer, you should publish at least one book in a renowned publishing house. In order to be a professional writer, you should pass this exam in a way to be noticed by a renowned publisher. A publisher should invest resources, publish your book, and only then you will be deemed a professional writer. So it's a complex situation. Nowadays, everyone is a writer, but the path towards professional literature is a very narrow one and very specific one. And that is why the situation is complex. And, well, I had another idea. This situation is not a new one. I read somewhere, I don't remember exactly where, perhaps in the Netherlands in the 17th century, it was a golden age for the Netherlands and the painting. Back then, 1/3 of the population were painting oil on canvas in the 17th century. 1/3 of the population, probably the same as Facebook today, where people write stuff. It seems to me this is not either good or bad, no good, no bad, it's just an interesting phenomenon. The same happened with photography. Before, it used to be a profession in its own merit. You needed to go through some kind of education, to buy expensive equipment, to be skilled. Today, we take out our mobile phone and we take a picture. And immediately we post it on Facebook, Instagram. So we have all become photographers. Everybody is a writer, everybody is a photographer. In other areas, not everyone has become a sculptor or architect. However, writers and photographers, yes, we are all writers and photographers. This is simply a modern phenomenon. And it's probably early to make any conclusions, whether it's good or bad, harmful for culture, good for culture. This process is at the beginning. We'll see what time brings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hofbauer.
Yeah, as I'm working in the publishing house, I see writers around me, and I prefer the readers, I have to say, in a way. but which is interesting, for instance, when you take the German word for publisher, it is Verleger. That means you have to put money in advance for some product, for the book. Yeah. And the question why so many people want to write, there are really many people writing, not only that doesn't have to do anything with the corona crisis that already exists since, I would say, 20 years, is because people try to find their personal identity, maybe by writing. Yeah? And in fact, it's not the worst thing, but it brings me back to the term identity, which was used by Emir Kusturica when he said, human identity is an aesthetic one. Yeah, and I agree, that's true. But identity is also a collective one, and we spoke about this. And here comes the common narrative into being, and that is, in a way, also a myth. Yeah, because this common narrative is able to tell many people about their identity. Yeah, let's say in different aspects: social aspects, cultural aspects, national or regional aspects, religious aspects, and every human community is rooted in this historically, in all these social, cultural, natural, religious aspects, and that gives, in a way, the common narrative. But now coming back to what Dmitry Danilov said at the very beginning, when he said this corona crisis was in a way special because you couldn't see any opposition. I saw quite a lot of opposition in Germany and also in Austria and in other countries, also in Italy. You couldn't see it maybe on the mainstream media, but there was, because this common narrative is always questioned. From inside every society, the opposition, we can see this not only in the question of Corona, we see this now in the United States, where this narrative of multicultural society is broken by Black Lives Matter, so a sort of counter narrative. And it's also questioned from outside, from foreigners, they enemy images. Yeah, and the answer to the question if a common narrative is false or right can be given only if you include the social, political, economic circumstances. In fact, the knowledge of who is dominating the discourse. Yeah, that's my point for this.
Yes, that's what is maybe becoming the most interesting in the proliferation and multiplying of artifacts, the question of who controls the mainstream and what's being inserted into the mainstream, into what's being published, and what is thought to be most popular, basically, and best accepted by the whole planet. The discourse that after the fall of the Soviet Union that the CNN had at the time I was living in the United States then, until recently CNN was like the holy scripture for the rest of the world. This is no longer true because within one society the situation changed and one interest financial group received a new representative. This is no longer the same person. There's no harmony between the people generating the mainstream and people reporting about this. In this sense, the discourse about whether we're reading about Russia, whether we're reading Prilepin, Salnikov, or maybe we're reading Monolaskin or... So when we read them, these three persons that I mentioned, including Guzel, we are actually reading something which relates to mythology. So we have spent some time talking about mythology and we haven't said that myths are holy stories. So translation to Serbian, I'm not sure about other languages, is that mythology includes this element of the idea of holiness, whether it is occult, Christian, Islamic, or whatever. So in the secular world, we are far away from the religion, we are left in our society, but when we read serious writers who don't go through these filters, who are not writing spontaneously, we can freely say that we are reading people with excellent works. However, there is no proper distribution. For example, it used to be that Time magazine would put on their front pages people who wrote good writers. I'm sorry, I'm not getting this. Yeah. So, who sets the agenda? This is the question. Whose discourse are we following? This is something that in Italy there was one publisher, in France there were two, in Greece 3, but these were the ones who managed these filters that Moga mentioned, and they somehow created what was being read. They were creating the taste. And this resulted in the publishing of Don Quixote, and I think that this is a book that needs to be read at least once a year, and this is a book that can answer many questions about artists without the ingredients. This is something which is opposed to the popular, democratized, and basically average literature, which wants to follow the main discourse and then becomes a subject of total manipulative machinery. And then instead of Frenzen, housewives read Donna Steele. So how can we create a society in which... I'm not getting this, sorry. Unfortunately, we are now... It's this discourse exactly which generates the idea about not focusing on the main idea of our life. And art is simply entertainment, and what I just mentioned, traveling on the airports, shows how the pictures have replaced the words, and how women or all generations are looking at iPhones and recorded materials of any kind. So the advantage, as somebody who worked in films and music, I can say that YouTube is a category that is very, let's say, interesting for me, because it helps us choose what we would like to see. I'm not getting this, sorry. So there's this level of spontaneity that exists on YouTube, which cannot be recreated in movies. Yeah, I think even Charlie Chaplin would be, let's say, worried by how many people out there can create similar impressive things spontaneously. So we need to believe that new social transformations, changes, will lead to the continuation of the mythological plane, because without the mythological plane there is no art.
At this time of the pandemic faces us with the position of the artist as opposed to the government and fake news, mainstream news, etc. I was thinking about, well, there are three types of artists which, in view of, well, this situation and in terms of the relationship with the government, they have three separate types of relations. The first is, I'm not sure if you read the small novel, Chronisterik, a Croatian writer, actually. He dedicated this novel to D'Annunzio. We know who D'Annunzio was and how this major language artist has become a leader, military leader, and then conquered Rijeka, established his own republic, etc. So you have such writers today. They appear in public speeches, columns, they write in newspapers. They are really determined in their political positions. They are their political positions about the virus, as to who they support, how and why. They're really strict, and they are chronisterics. Why? Because we are coming back to myth. Kronos used to eat his own children. In the myth, only Zeus managed to avoid this terrible fate, and this time eats up its own authors and writers, which are quite hysterical as writers. This is the first group. The second group, which unfortunately has fewer and fewer artists, but these are so-called public tribunes that support a national cause, but are wise enough and they're thinking long-term, and their strategy of public speaking is also long-term. Sometimes they do play with the government, but they stick to their own role and remain what they are even after their death. And the third type of writers appear in this crisis. I'm not sure I will give an adequate name. These are clowns. I call them clowns. Not clowns in terms of entertainment, entertaining the king, the buffoons. No. A clown or the type of Charlie Chaplin or Benini. These kind of artists, there are many of them in literature, which simply you have a range of, they can be happy or very dark. They just play with the dogma of power, with pandemics, with restrictions, with bans, and they give a reason for this, for the awakening of this human potential for irony, for play. Even sometimes they have this kind of demonic hidden part of human nature. I think that today, at the time of the pandemic, and even before, in this whole period in the last 20 years, we are seeing very often this type of writers, chronisterics, tribunes. And now, what path will artists choose? Who will they side with? Respecting themselves, of course. This is the true question. This is a question that they can ask when the pandemic is finished, because this is the possibility of them having an artistic path. And this gives them either power or it takes away power from them, just like in myth. In mythical stories, will they be even more empowered, or will they be swallowed by politics,
ekonomijom,
economy,
popularnošću.
popularity.
To je to.
This would be it.
Hvala lepo, gospodine.
Thank you
Thyssen.
very
Vi ste
much,
želeli-
Mr. Thyssen. You wanted to say something, please?
Yes, I was just thinking about what Mr. Prokopiev was talking about in terms of power and words and the connection between power and words and how words have always had power. But that's not what I was thinking about. I was thinking about two other things. One is this discussion about readers versus writers, and what Mr. Moga was saying about those 800,000 Spanish people writing versus we would like them to read. I have to say that anecdotally, I don't have any statistics to back this up, but certainly I know that in my community during this pandemic, there has been far more reading going on and people clamoring for books and asking for books. And on my social networks, does somebody have a copy of, for example, Moby Dick or War and Peace? They're wanting to read long and they're wanting to read deep. And which I think is great. They're wanting to disappear into that world or to stop time, as one of you said. And I think that's really valuable. I think that people are realizing the value of art and culture during this time period when they are taking a pause. And it's not just about YouTube and Netflix and things like that. People get bored of that very easily. I think they're using this time to read at a greater level. And I'm interested to see what the statistics show in the end of how many more people bought books or read or were exchanging material. The second thing I wanted to talk about is about this idea about filters. And because I think that art, great art is probably created with filters, as we've talked about, but that myth is not. Certainly Homer wasn't, sending off his work to an editor and a publisher. And so I think myth actually has very few filters. The only filter that myth has is time and the idea that it's told from one person to the next person. It's only communicated over a long period of time and usually, again, through an oral thing, not necessarily through something that is read, but it's still communicated through words. And so I don't think we need to worry about whether there's a lot of filters or not filters. Great art is always going to demand a certain kind of filter, but I don't think myth does. Thank you.
I just have to add, at the time when people moved on to writing, in ancient Greece, this was a politically very dramatic twist. Plato speaks about the killing, let's say, or murderous quality of written language. Because if you translate myths or dramas into writing, these people were in a very difficult position. So the question of filters in which a writer translates a myth into the language of poetry or dramatic literature, then this person, this job was actually very, very difficult. Greek literature was not created with consent from the people who created the philosophical scene. It had a healing dimension before that. So to Epidaurus, tens of thousands of people from Greece went to see what or how actually the drama that they were already familiar with, how it was, let's say, organized or presented. They knew the myth, but they were unfamiliar with the form. So these tens of thousands of people lived a catharsis. They even brought in, let's say, crazy people to sort of try and find treatment for them through this. So Greece at one point had only oral literature, and then they transferred to this written literature. This change was very dramatic. Sorry, I didn't get this. But simply there were no funds except for this form that had this direct and not indirect experience.
Hvala, Emire.
Thank you, Emir.
Evo, otprilike
So
sada
basically now is
kraj, odnosno kraj formata.
now we're coming to the time where this discussion should end. We are ending the third hour of our very interesting discussion. So if you agree, I wanted to suggest that all of the participants can say a few more words as their final thoughts about this topic of myth and culture. And in this way we can end this topic, which in its scope could obviously last for many more hours, but I hope that there will be opportunity to meet again, at least electronically, and talk about this topic that's present in all parts of human history, culture, art, and to enrich it with our thoughts or personal insights. So, I would like to invite all of the participants. Let's start right now with Thea, the only lady in presence. Thea can maybe be the first to give the final opinion in this conversation.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say what a joy it's been to get to hear everyone's opinions and to be here and to have this discussion with all of you across this great distance. One of the questions that was posed to us in the document that we received outlining how this conversation will go was, how does art enter into dialogue with myth in our time, and can it be an inspiration for the artist? And thinking a lot about what everyone has said, I'd like to close out by saying that, we all come from different mythic traditions, and we also come from a shared mythic tradition that goes back to antiquity. Every single one of us, for better or worse, has been shaped by myths since childhood. Myths are often the first stories we hear. They're formative. They explain at least history, if not the function of the world to us. And so I think that the artist's obligation, should the artist's interest lie in connecting with myth in their own work, I think that their obligation is twofold. Because power so often obliterates mythologies, and narrative systems that don't conform to it or uphold its values. It is the artist's obligation to uncover lost stories that complicate rather than reinforce the status quo, that complicate a national or a global mythology. And it's also obviously the artist's job to upend existing mythologies, to interrogate established truths and systems of power that limit imagination and demand adherence. And re-examining our mythologies is a very fertile way to do that, and continue to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, like we started about talking about the myths, I think to communicate like we did now is a sort of a exchange of different myths, different cultural myths, different myths from nations, gender, man, woman, and also different narratives. They root in history always. And the question we spoke about, to my mind, also was who is able to hegemonize these narratives, these myths, and that has to be can only be answered by political and economic, going into political and economic leaderships who can be able to hegemonize this. This would be my conclusion. Thank you.
I'm really glad to have participated in this conference and for having met you, all of my dear colleagues. I'm sorry that we haven't been able to meet personally, physically, to see ourselves physically, but even such socializing is great for me, and it's an honor for me to participate in this event together with you. These 3 hours were very interesting to me, and you are all great persons. I'm glad to have met you. I like the fact that we have spoken about the topic of myth. Myths are the foundation of culture. Culture is based on myths, and they are, of course, intertwined. And also we have discussed the situation in the world in relation to the pandemic, because I believe before our very eyes we see developments of historical importance. Of course, it will be analyzed later for centuries. A shift has been happening in everything in the world, in the economy, in politics, and in culture, of course. And it seems to me that we, of course, haven't found the responses to these big issues, but we pose certain questions. We have discussed issues about myths that will now emerge due to this whole situation, the lockdown caused by the virus. That is why it was very interesting to hear your opinions, and I will think about some issues that preoccupy me. After this conference, I want to thank you once again for inviting me and all of you for having participated.
I'm just delighted to be here. What I'm really looking forward to doing now is to reading your work. And so I'm hoping that some, if not all of it, is available in English translation, and that we will be able to communicate not only through speaking to each other, but actually communicating by sharing our work with each other. I think that would be part of the glories of these conferences, is that you get to meet other artists and to read other people's views, because of course the act of writing is the act of discovering what you believe, and reading is understanding and sharing the beliefs. And so I'm looking forward to actually reading your work. That is the most important thing that will come out of this for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Prokopiev, please. When I got invitation, and I want to thank the organizers, when I received the invitation, I was thinking, well, this is maybe too extensive, too broad of a topic. And I was concerned that it would be a presentation of general things, and that it would be too official. On the contrary, it was very good, because all of us spoke in a different way, and we are very diverse in terms of background and psychological profile, probably, and we are very different individually. On one hand, it was very informal, and on the other hand, it was really smart, so to speak. 3 hours just flew by, and the night is already falling in Skopje. It was very pleasant, it was very quick and interesting, because I was listening to different aspects, different personal opinions, and most importantly, this general situation and some major questions that were addressed was combined. All this was combined with this topic of myth and culture. On the other hand, there were personal and intimate aspects in our presentations, so I liked it very much. And I really hope that we will continue our contacts, and most importantly, apart from this virtual electronic form, maybe we will have something on paper, maybe a book, some kind of paper. If we do that, then I think this will make me very happy. Thank you. Thank you for your kind words. Mr. Moga, let us hear what you have to say as a final word. I am the last, and in this last round, I want to join what our colleagues said. First, I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for having organized this event. Counterpoint, to thank everybody that participated, and I'm really honored to have been invited. For me, it was a pleasure from the bottom of my heart. This is not a formal thanks, but it's really from the bottom of my heart. The fact that I can see Alexandra, Theo, Vern, Emir, this is great. Of course, we cannot give the final response to the questions that we addressed during the conference, but I think that we have opened the topic, and I think that we will be able to provide an answer by having everybody contributing with their opinions and positions. But of course, there will be no total definitive response. Of course, also due to the limited time that we have. I fully agree with Alexander, and I think that the most interesting thing during this conference was the fact that we combined individual and collective aspects. Everybody gave a specific vision that's determined by their country and background, but on the other hand, we managed to do what I think is very important for this counterpoint, and this is to enhance this idea of universality of culture. This is, of course, the idea that was very important during the whole history, during the Renaissance, during different historical periods. So I think that it's very important for writers around the world, all different countries, for us to be able to gather in this way in our living rooms and to feel that there is a togetherness, something that we can share and support together at the universal level, at the same time, not to forget our individuality. So what I was able to remember is the fact that myths are born from togetherness, from commonness. So different values within mankind. These are the things that are essential to human beings. Fear, the desire to live, fear from death. Us as writers, as people, we must continue to work on analyzing and deepening to see what are the most important elements of myth. Also, we must contribute to the creation of myth, but at the same time to continue this line, this thread from the old Greek myths to those of today, and to see what values are born from myths in order to be able to create a better society altogether. I think that this is for us as writers the most important task. Finally, although I will be quick, I want to agree what Alexander said. I want to join this desire for us to be able to publish maybe a publication, a book. I will contribute, of course, with a poem of mine, and it will be a pleasure to participate. And of course, it will be a pleasure for me to see all of you once again and to inform you that my book of poetry was published in English, and I hope that we will continue this relationship of ours both as writers and readers. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moga, for these inspirational words. Emir, please. I will be very brief. I have never learned from you whence this idea of the Belgrade Counterpoint, and I thought once that it was a reply to the Counterpoint by Aldous Huxley. In any case, this range of sorry. This time the topic was myth, and I would like to add an archetype. In man's archetype, just like with birds, a bird has never seen how a nest is made, but still can make a nest. So men, not knowing everything they should know, has a huge core of organic feelings that they can use if they take a branch that has begun to grow. Just like every tree is an imitation of our blood vessels, our idea of mythology is a twofold. On one hand, to be modern, we must demythologize the past, but on the other hand, we cannot do without myth. Because without myths, it's as if we spoke about individuals without considering the past, the family as a mythical place of literature, of film, and art in general. So we are destroying myths in order to preserve them and to make new myths without forgetting the archetype. Thank you, Emir. So, as a reply to a question about the counterpoint, this is a rare but a good opportunity for me not to be modest and to say that this was actually my idea. It has been my idea a few years ago, and it was about Belgrade once a year should be the center for people to gather from all over the world, all parts of the world, and for people from different cultures and different sensibilities, people from culture speak of topics that are important for our life, people living in this era, in the 21st century. Unfortunately, also, we have been prevented to organize a physical gathering this year, to be able to meet and to socialize, but this format of this year was very effective and productive, a lot of ideas, and the meaning of Counterpoint as a place where ideas meet and converge, and they can also be different, of course, because the counterpoint is an element of harmony. So a good harmony consists of ideas, of views, positions, and angles that perhaps differ, but this makes the totality of man's knowledge, and this is what makes us human. As for the topic, I think that it was very interesting. My conclusion is that culture, especially art, just like myth teaches us to see the world around us in a different way. What is this way? This is the way we will look inside our hearts and souls and try to understand our personal destiny, but also the destiny of the universe, the mankind, in a way that transcends our typical daily personal interests. The universality of trying is the sense of myth and arts, and this is what makes art and myth identical, at least similar. And if today, in the third decade of the 21st century, there is no priesthood, professional priesthood or secular priesthood, that can give us mythical knowledge as it was the case in the past, then it remains to hope that this mythical knowledge will be provided by art and artists, writers, musicians, composers, creators in any area, from the bottom of their souls, to give us the mythical knowledge that will make us better persons and the world a better place to stay. I want to thank you once again for participating, and I believe that we will find a way to record what we have discussed, and then in the future, of course, you will be welcome to Belgrade in some kind of gathering that will remind of this counterpoint, to be able to meet and socialize and to exchange. Thank you once again.
All the best.
All the best.
Thank you. Hvala.
Bye, do свидания. Adios.
Hvala.
Спасибо. Спасибо.